The urn sat on the living room mantel for 3 years. I know that because the woman who called me, I will call her Teresa, told me the first thing she saw every morning when she walked downstairs was her mother's face in a photograph, and directly below it, a small mahogany box with a brass plate, her mother's name, 2 dates. She told me she talked to that box. She would say good morning to it. She would tell it about the weather, about what the children were doing in school. She had convinced herself, or tried to, that this was a form of closeness, that keeping her mother near was an act of love. Then her youngest daughter, who was 9 years old, started waking up screaming. I want to be careful here. I am describing a composite of cases I have encountered over the years in my work, and I am not reporting any single family's private history. The names, specific details, and identifying features in what I describe are drawn from patterns I have observed across many situations rather than from one particular family. But the pattern I am about to walk you through is not unusual. It is not rare, and that is precisely why I feel compelled to address it. My name is Chad Ripperger. I am a priest of the Society of the Most Sorrowful Mother, a Thomistic philosopher, and a priest who has worked in exorcism and deliverance for many years. I have spent that time at the intersection of Catholic theology and the real spiritual lives of real people. And what I want to talk about today is not sensational. It is pastoral. It is something that grieving families are almost never told, and the silence around it is causing genuine harm. Teresa was a practicing Catholic. She went to Mass on Sundays. She had her children baptized, made her Easter duty, contributed to the parish. She was not a negligent Catholic. She was an ordinary Catholic in a parish that had, in the ordinary way of many parishes over the last several decades, failed to pass on certain parts of what the church actually teaches. When her mother died in the winter of the previous year, the funeral home took care of nearly everything. The cremation was arranged quietly. The urn arrived at her door a few days later in a cardboard box that looked like something that might contain a kitchen appliance. She placed it on the mantel because she did not know what else to do. Because no one had told her there was anything more required of her. Because the priest who came to the wake said the prayers and went home and did not mention, not once, what the church teaches about where the ashes of the dead belong. Teresa lived with that urn on the mantel for the better part of a year before anything seemed out of the ordinary. She had arranged the space around it carefully, a small battery-powered candle, a photograph, a little ceramic angel her mother had kept on her own dresser. She visited the arrangement every day. She said the rosary in front of it sometimes. She thought she was being a good Catholic daughter. Her youngest daughter began waking at night sometime in the autumn that followed. Not every night at first, once a week, then twice. The child would come into her parents' room and say something was in her room. She was 9 years old, and she was not, by temperament, a dramatic child. She was matter of fact, the way quiet children often are. She did not say it was scary, she said it was there, like she was reporting a fact. Teresa moved her into the parents' bed for several nights, and the nights were quiet, and she assumed the child had been going through something related to grief, to the strangeness of a grandmother's death, to the proximity of the box on the mantel. Children process loss in ways we do not always understand. She let it rest. The screaming started in February. By the time Teresa called me, she had gone through 18 months of interrupted sleep, 2 visits to a pediatrician who found nothing, 1 consultation with a school counselor who suggested the child might benefit from drawing her feelings, and a quiet, steady withdrawal on the part of her 16-year-old son from the living room. He did not announce it. He did not say anything was wrong. He simply stopped coming downstairs in the evenings. When Teresa asked him why, he said the living room felt wrong. He could not say more than that. He was not a boy who reached for supernatural explanations. He was a boy who liked soccer and mathematics, and who had never, in 16 years, expressed any particular sensitivity to the spiritual atmosphere of a room. Wrong, that was the word he used. The room felt wrong. I asked Teresa during our first conversation a series of questions that I ask in every situation where a family is describing disturbances they cannot account for through ordinary means. Was the house blessed? No, not in the years since they had moved in. which was before her mother's death. Had she offered masses for her mother since the funeral? No. The one mass at the funeral and nothing since. Did her mother have a grave? No burial had taken place. The urn was going to be buried eventually, she said. Eventually. When the time felt right, I asked her, what does eventually mean? She was quiet for a moment. She said she did not know. I told her that the time had come. And then I had to explain why, because explanation matters. The grieving deserve to know the reasons. They deserve not to be simply handed a rule and told to comply. They deserve the theology. Thomas Aquinas, working in the 13th century and building on Aristotle's framework, but going somewhere Aristotle never went, taught that the soul is the form of the body. This teaching, which the Church received into her official theological patrimony, is not a figure of speech. It is a precise metaphysical claim about what the human person is. The soul does not occupy the body the way a pilot occupies a cockpit, using it as a vehicle and departing when the vehicle is destroyed. The soul organizes the body, gives it its specific kind of life, constitutes with it the one substance that is the human person. A human body is what it is because of the soul that informs it. When the soul departs at death, the body is no longer animated, but it retains a dignity that derives from what it was. It was the body of a person. It was the particular matter through which a particular rational soul acted in the world, loved in the world, received the sacraments, was baptized, received the body of Christ. That history is written into what the body is. St. Paul understood this in a different register, the register of encounter, of revelation, of the actual risen Christ who appeared to him outside Damascus. He wrote to the Corinthians in the 15th chapter of his first letter that what is sown in corruption is raised in incorruption. What is sown in dishonor is raised in glory. What is sown in weakness is raised in power. What is sown a natural body is raised a spiritual body. He is speaking about this body, your body, Teresa's body, her mother's body. The resurrection of the dead is not a metaphor for the survival of the personality. It is the bodily resurrection of the same person. The same matter transformed by grace and glory, restored to the soul that informed it. This is the faith. The Curé d'Ars, Jean-Marie Vianney, who died on the 4th of August, 1859, used to say that the first thought he had upon waking in the morning was, I will see God. He meant it with his whole being, through the whole of himself, soul and body together. He understood, as the saints always understand, that what awaits us is not the disembodied survival of a spirit, but the resurrection of the person, body and soul reunited, glorified, standing before God. The Church's burial practice has always been an expression of this faith. She buried her dead in consecrated ground, not arbitrarily, not out of cultural convention, but as a theological statement written in ritual. The catacombs of Rome, where the early Christians buried their martyrs and their ordinary faithful dead in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, are one long testimony to this conviction. The inscriptions on the walls ask for refrigerium, refreshment, rest, the peace of God for the souls of the dead. The bones were kept in niches in the rock. The community gathered above them to pray. The tombs of the martyrs became the altars of the first churches. Peter's bones were under the altar of the greatest church in the world. That is not sentiment. That is the church's theology in stone. For most of Christian history, the church absolutely forbade cremation. The prohibition was not arbitrary. In the Roman world, cremation was explicitly associated with the pagan denial of resurrection, with the philosophical claim that the body was matter to be returned to the elements, that nothing awaited it, that the Christian hope was delusion. The church said no. She buried her dead. She said by the act of burial that this body awaits something. It awaits the resurrection. In 1963, the church lifted the prohibition on cremation. She did so because the cultural associations had shifted sufficiently, because the explicit anti-resurrection ideology was no longer the primary motivation of those who chose cremation, and because legitimate pastoral and practical needs existed in many parts of the world. She permitted cremation, but she has never treated it as her preference. She has never stopped preferring burial of the body. And in permitting cremation, she immediately began insisting on what must follow. What must follow is what the 2016 Vatican instruction ad resurgendum cum Christo in Latin, to rise with Christ, spells out with clarity. This instruction was issued by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It carries real magisterial authority. It is not a pastoral suggestion. It states that the ashes of a cremated Catholic must be kept in a sacred place, a cemetery, a columbarium, or another place designated by proper church authority. They may not be scattered on the sea, in the air, or on the earth. They may not be divided among family members. They may not be kept in the home of a private individual. That last provision, they may not be kept in a private home, is the one that would have changed everything for Teresa, and it is the one she had never heard. The instruction explains why. Keeping ashes at home deprives the deceased of the suffrages and prayers of the church. It deprives the faithful of the practice of going to a grave to pray, to remember, to intercede. It creates confusion in the minds of the faithful about the resurrection of the body, about the sanctity of death, about the difference between the living and the dead. The ashes belong to the communion of the dead in Christ. They belong in the community of sacred rest, that is the Catholic cemetery. They belong under the care of the church, in a place where the church's prayers for the dead surround them and hold them. When I told Teresa this, slowly, carefully, not an accusation, but an explanation, she did not react with anger. She got very still. And then she said something that has stayed with me. She said, I always felt guilty about it. I never let myself say that. I always felt like something was not right. Her instinct was correct. Something was not right. And the fact that her instinct registered it, even without the doctrinal vocabulary to name it, tells you something about the depth at which the church's teaching is embedded in the Catholic sensibility, even in Catholics who have not been given the explicit teaching. There is something in the formation of baptism and the Eucharist and the sacramental life that creates a sense, however inarticulate, of when things are ordered and when they are not. I want to pause on that word ordered. Ordered is a Thomistic word. It means things are in their proper relation to one another, not just tidy, not just organized in some pragmatic sense. Ordered means that each thing occupies the place appropriate to its nature and its end. The dead belong in the earth, in sacred ground, in the custody of the church. The living belong in the world of the sacraments, of prayer, of intercession. When the dead are kept in the domestic space of the living, when the boundary between the two modes of existence is collapsed into a mahogany box on a mantle, things are disordered, not always dramatically, not always in ways the family immediately notices, but the disorder is real. Things were not ordered in Teresa's house, they needed to be ordered. And the ordering in this case was not complicated. Now I want to speak to you directly, to you watching this, whether you are in a situation like Teresa's or whether you are trying to understand this teaching before you face a death in your own family, or whether you are grieving someone right now and wondering if you have done something wrong. If you have done something wrong, the church is not here to condemn you. She is here to correct you, which is an act of love, and then to offer you the means to set things right. Correction without remedy is not pastoral care. So I want to give you both the correction and the remedy. The church permits cremation. Let me be plain about this, because I do not want anyone to walk away feeling that they sinned grievously by allowing a loved one to be cremated. You did not. Cremation is permitted. What the church requires, and this is the truth, the grieving are almost never told, is that the ashes must go to sacred ground. Not eventually, not when the time feels right, as soon as possible, with the same intention and care that would accompany the burial of an intact body. The reason is the dignity of the body and the faith in the resurrection. These two things are not separable. If you believe in the resurrection of the body, and the Catholic Church defines this as an article of faith, something required for salvation, then you believe that the matter that was once informed by the soul has a future. It awaits transformation. It awaits the resurrection. That is not a poetic way of speaking. It is a theological claim that has consequences for how we treat what is left behind. Scattered ashes have no place of prayer. Divided ashes have no unity. Ashes on a mantle have no sacred ground, no church prayer, no intercession of the community of the faithful who pass by and remember the dead in their prayers. All of this matters. All of it is connected to the theology of the body and the resurrection, and to the practical pastoral care that the living owe to the dead. I told Teresa what to do. I want to tell you the same. Contact your diocese or your parish. Ask about the interment of cremated remains. Ask about the Catholic cemetery in your area or about a columbarium. Get the information, make the appointment, and go through the ritual the Church provides. It is not an elaborate ceremony. A priest blesses the ashes. The urn is placed in the ground or in the niche of a columbarium wall in a place that has been blessed and set apart for the dead. The Church's prayers surround what is placed there. And from that moment, the connection between you and your loved one passes through the Church, through intercession, through the sacramental order that holds the living and the dead together in the one body of Christ. That is where the connection belongs, not on your mantle, however lovingly arranged, in sacred ground, under the care of the Church, in the communion of those who wait for the resurrection. Do not scatter ashes. I know the appeal. Open water, mountains, places the person loved. But scattering dissolves the body into the world without any place of sacred rest, without any point of return, without any anchor for prayer. The 2016 instruction forbids it explicitly. The Church's reasoning is consistent. The body awaits resurrection. It belongs in a defined sacred place. And scattering denies the community of the dead, the physical location that makes ongoing intercession concrete and communal. Do not divide the ashes among family members. This is sometimes done with the best intentions. Each child wants something. But it fragments what should be held in unity. It distributes the remains across homes that are not sacred places, and it multiplies the problem rather than resolving it. Do not keep the ashes permanently in the home, even if you intend eventually to bury them. Eventually becomes years. Years become decades. Children grow up in a house with a mantle they are afraid to ask about. Do it now. Do it this month. After I spoke with Teresa, she called her parish. She made the arrangements within 2 weeks. The interment took place on a Saturday morning in October, a clear morning, she said, with the smell of cut grass from the section of the cemetery that had been recently maintained. A priest from her parish came. He said the words the Church provides, the prayers for the burial of ashes, the commendation of the soul to God. The urn was placed in the ground next to her mother's parents, in sacred soil. In the communion of the dead, 3 weeks later, Teresa called me again. She did not lead with the spiritual disturbances because they had resolved. She simply said her daughter was sleeping. She said it the way you say something you had almost stopped hoping to be able to say. Her daughter was sleeping. Her son had come back downstairs. The house felt, she said, like a house again, rather than like a place where something was waiting. I believed her. I have heard this enough times to believe it. What I want you to understand is that what happened to Teresa's family was not exceptional. It was the ordinary consequence of an ordinary failure of catechesis in an ordinary parish where ordinary Catholics were buried or cremated without the ordinary pastoral guidance the Church has always been charged with providing. The failure is widespread. The consequences are widespread, and they are addressable. The address begins here. I have been asked in different contexts to explain how it came to this. How did a church that had maintained burial practices for 2,000 years arrive at a point where most of her members do not know what to do with cremated remains? The answer is not mysterious. It is a collapse of catechesis that has a specific history, and that history is important to understand because without it, the present feels inexplicable. The Second Vatican Council, which took place between 1962 and 1965, did not mandate or even encourage the dismantling of traditional Catholic practice. Read the documents. They are available in translation, and they have been available for 60 years. What the Council actually said and what was done in the Council's name are two entirely different things. The catastrophic misreading, and in some cases the deliberate misappropriation of the Council's spirit, produced a generation of religious education programs that set aside or actively discouraged much of what had been handed down. The catechism was simplified. The doctrine of the resurrection of the body was mentioned but not dwelt upon. The theology of death, judgment, purgatory, heaven, and hell, the four last things, was largely evacuated from ordinary parish life. Death was treated as a pastoral problem to be managed, not a theological reality to be understood and prepared for. In this vacuum, the funeral industry moved in. I say this without malice toward individuals in that industry, many of whom are decent people doing a hard job. But as an industry, it is organized around efficiency, comfort, and the management of grief as a logistical problem. It has no theological agenda. It has a business agenda. Cremation became common not because Catholics had thought through the theology and concluded it was appropriate, but because it was convenient and less expensive, and because no one in the parish was telling them anything different. The result was the Teresa situation repeated across millions of American Catholic families in the last 40 years. Urns on mantles, ashes scattered at sea because a loved one liked the ocean, ashes divided among siblings because each wanted something to keep. All of it done in good faith, all of it done out of love and grief, and all of it contrary to what the church teaches, not because the families were bad Catholics, but because the church at the parish level had failed to tell them what the church teaches. When the infrastructure of sacramental catechesis collapses, when people do not know what the Eucharist is, do not go to confession, do not understand the resurrection of the body, have not been taught the four last things, there is a corresponding collapse in the spiritual protection that infrastructure provides. I'm not theorizing here, I am reporting from experience. The homes I walk into where these spiritual disturbances are present are almost always homes where the ordinary sacramental life has lapsed. The confession is not happening. The Eucharist is received without understanding. The rosary is not prayed, the house is not blessed, the dead are not prayed for, and into that absence the enemy moves. He is opportunistic. I have said this before, and I will say it again until someone can show me why it is not true. The demonic does not require a formal invitation. It requires a gap, an absence of the spiritual defenses that the church has provided precisely because the spiritual world is real and the battle in it is real. A home where the ashes of the dead sit without sacred ground, without ongoing intercession, without the church's formal ritual of burial, is a home with a gap. That does not mean every such home will experience what Teresa's family experienced. The demonic is not automatic. There is nothing mechanistic about spiritual reality. But the risk is real, the pattern is documented in the experience of those who work in this area, and it is unnecessary. The remedy is available, the church provides it. It requires only that we take the church seriously. I want to return, before I give you the practical steps, to something Teresa said when I asked her why she had not buried her mother's ashes in the 3 years since the death. She said, "I thought I was supposed to wait until I was ready to let go." This is a widespread and deeply mistaken idea about grief and about what burial means. Burial is not the same as letting go. It is not the end of the relationship between the living and the dead. It is the ordering of that relationship. It is the acknowledgement that the dead have passed into a different mode of existence, one that is no longer domestic and immediate, but eschatological and intercessory. The grave is not where you put someone when you are done with them. The grave is where you place the body of someone you love in the care of the church and the hope of the resurrection, and from which you can continue to intercede for them and pray with them and hold them in the communion of the faith. The Catholic practice of visiting graves, of offering masses for the dead, of praying the rosary for the souls in purgatory, is not a relic of superstition. It is the living expression of the belief that death does not sever the bonds of charity. What love built between you and another person does not end when the person dies. It continues in a different key. And the Church provides a liturgical and sacramental structure through which that continuing love is exercised. Masses offered, rosaries prayed, graves visited, names spoken in the prayer of the faithful. Teresa was not wrong to want to stay close to her mother. She was right to want that. She was simply mistaken about what closeness looks like after death. It does not look like an urn on a mantle. It looks like a grave to visit, like a mass offered on her mother's birthday, like a rosary prayed for the repose of her mother's soul, like asking the Blessed Virgin Mary to intercede for her mother at the throne of God. That is closeness. That is love. That is what the Catholic tradition has always provided for the grieving. Here is what I ask of you. Go to confession this week. Not eventually, not when you feel spiritually prepared. Go now. Find a parish that offers the sacrament. Call ahead if you need to and go.